This day in sports history. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History. I am your host, Steve White. Happy Thanksgiving. It is November 27th, and on this day up and down the sports history timeline, we had one of the greatest upsets in college football history. I've also got a few Thanksgiving Day memories to pass along to you, as well as the greatest comeback in NBA history. And stick around until the end for a non-sports fun fact about Thanksgiving that you probably didn't know about. But since it's Turkey Day and football is on everybody's plate today, let's start with a Turkey Day game played on this day back in 1980, and it was an instant classic. This was the Chicago Bears and the Detroit Lions. Detroit quarterback Gary Danielson helped the Lions build a 17-3 lead in the third quarter after he threw a 47-yard touchdown pass to Billy Sims and then ran one in later in the game. Bears quarterback Vince Evans equaled that, throwing a touchdown to Bob Fisher for a 20-yard score, and then on a 3rd and goal from the 4-yard line with time winding down in this one, Evans scrambled for the tying score. Here's former Chicago Bears play-by-play man Joe McConnell with the call that day.
This might be the final play of the game unless there's a penalty. Back to throw. Evans looking. He's going to run. He's to the 5. He scores. He went in. He scores. No time remaining. An extra point by Bob Thomas would put it into overtime.
That capped a 14-play, 94-yard drive, and it sent the game into overtime. Now, this was the first time that a Thanksgiving game had gone to OT, which is not that surprising considering that the OT rule had only been in effect since 1974. The Bears won the coin toss and they elected to receive. And not only was it the first, it was also the fastest.
We're underway here in overtime. Davey Williams at the 5, to the 10, to the 15, to the 20. He breaks through to the 25, to the 30. Coming to the near sideline. He's to the 40. He's to the 50. Down the sideline. He's to the 30. He may score. He's going to win it. A kickoff return by Davey Williams. 95 yards. And the Bears win it in unbelievable fashion. Davey Williams, 95 yards. As he started up the far sideline, he cut back to the near sideline, and he's being mobbed beyond the end zone.
It took 13 seconds for Dave Williams to go the 95 yards. That was the fastest end to overtime at that point. The 2012 Denver Broncos bettered that when Tim Tebow hit Demaryius Thomas for an 80-yard touchdown on the first play of overtime against the Pittsburgh Steelers in 11 seconds. So the Dallas Cowboys, along with the Lions, will host games this afternoon. And, the Lions have been doing it since 1934. The Cowboys started hosting on Thanksgiving Day back in 1966, and except for a couple of years since, have played at home on Turkey Day. Well, prior to the Cowboys, though, there was another team based in Dallas that played in the NFL. That team lasted only 1 year in the league, but they played their most memorable game on this day back in 1952. The Dallas Texans are not part of the Cowboys franchise at all, nor are they associated with the Dallas Texans of the American Football League that eventually became the Kansas City Chiefs after the 1962 season. Instead, this was a franchise that had formerly been the New York Yanks, and prior to that, the New York Bulldogs. And there was also an association with the Dayton Triangles, one of the original NFL teams that started back in 1920. I'm kind of getting too deep into the weeds here, but it's just kind of important to know the history and the fact that they only spent 1 year in Dallas. Now, they won only one game the previous year in New York, and here in 1952, they were 0-9 coming into this Thanksgiving Day game against the Chicago Bears. So suffice it to say, they were not good, and being a new team in Dallas, nobody cared about them because they were so bad. The Bears were not much better with a 4-5 record. The Texans had made a mid-season trade, however, to bring in a new quarterback, and his name was Frank Tripucka. And yeah, if that last name sounds familiar, this is Kelly Tripucka's dad. Tripucka started the final 6 games for the Texans, but he hadn't really had that much success. Obviously, no marks in the win column, and he ended his 1-year stint with Dallas throwing just 3 touchdown passes to go along with 17 interceptions. Things were going so bad for Tripucka and the Texans in Dallas that they were not even allowed to play their final home game at home in the Cotton Bowl. Instead, a scheduling conflict there forced them to move it to Akron, Ohio, to play at the Rubber Bowl. To add more insult, Bears coach George Halas decided to play his JV squad against the Texans in this one. He brought his starters along just in case, but he had zero intention of using them. So, now, you've got two terrible teams playing in a neutral city with absolutely nothing to play for. But this one actually got interesting. After Tripucka drilled a pass down to the goal line, he scored on a 1-yard run to give Dallas a 20-2 lead in the third quarter. Well, at that point, Halas put his starters back in, and the tide changed. Behind the ageless George Blanda, the Bears rushed for one, and then Blanda threw two more to put Chicago in the lead, 23-20. Time was growing short, and if the Texans wanted to win this one, they needed to get moving. The Texans got the ball back on their own 25 and began marching down the field. Tripucka was able to connect with Tom Keene at the 1-yard line with under a minute to play. 2 plays later, Frank Tripucka scored his second touchdown of the day from a yard out to put Dallas back on top 27-23 with 34 seconds left and held on to win it, their lone win of the season. The Texans had pulled off a Thanksgiving Day miracle. Halas was apparently so upset after this loss that on the plane ride home, he walked the aisle, slapping the team's Thanksgiving meals onto the floor. The Texans lost their final 2 games of the year and then folded after just the 1 year in 1952. They are the last NFL team to fold. On this day in 1926, it was one of the biggest football upsets in college football history, as Carnegie Tech surprised mighty Notre Dame. The Irish were not used to losing in 1926. They were 8-0 and had only given up 7 points all year. Head coach Knute Rockne was so sure that his team would win this one, he was not even there. Instead, he was in Chicago at the Army-Navy game being played that day at Soldier Field to scout the midshipmen. Navy was undefeated as well, and everybody assumed that, they'd beat Army. And of course, the assumption was that Notre Dame would beat Carnegie Tech. And then those 2 teams, Navy and Notre Dame, would probably meet in the Rose Bowl playing for a championship. So instead, assistant coach Tommy Mills was on the sideline for the Irish at Forbes Field. There was also word that Rockne was going to keep his first stringers in South Bend to keep them fresh for a trip to the West Coast the following week, but he backed out of that. What the plan turned out to be, though, was to play the backups and then bring the first-teamers in for the second half and run roughshod over the Tartans. But that plan did not work out so well. Bill Donahoe and C.J. Letzelter hung touchdowns on the second squad to give the Tartans a 13-0 halftime lead. When the first-team guys came onto the field in the second half, things didn't get any better for the Irish. In fact, they got worse. A couple of drop-kick field goals made the final score an amazing 19-0 for Carnegie Tech. Rockne regretted his absence and his hubris, and it cost his team a possible Rose Bowl experience. The game that Rockne saw was a 21-21 tie that cost Navy a shot at the title and the Rose Bowl as well. Instead, it was Stanford and Alabama who wound up in the Rose Bowl after the 1926 season. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1994, Dan Marino pulled off the fake spike. This was the 7-4 Miami Dolphins in the Meadowlands against the 6-5 New York Jets. While the Dolphins were firmly in the playoff picture, the Jets were on the outside looking in, but a win against Miami would put them right back in the mix. The Jets built a 17-0 lead before Miami could even get their offense moving toward the end zone. A couple of Marino to Mark Ingram touchdowns, though, in the third did narrow the margin. But Jets quarterback Boomer Esiason hit Johnny Mitchell for a scoring strike for the second time on the day and the Jets were back up 24-14 heading to the fourth. Esiason had trouble throwing to his own receivers in the final 15, however, throwing a pair of picks. The first one led to another Marino to Ingram hookup, and the lead was down to 3. After the second pick, the Dolphins were driving with 42 seconds left in the game. Let's pick it up there with a call from that day's NBC broadcast with Marv Albert and Paul McGuire.
Second down and 1 at the 18-yard line, and Marino completes inside the 10, has a first down. Ingram again, stopped by Glenn.
Marino's trying to get everybody on the line of scrimmage. Now, he still has one timeout. They'll save that for the field goal if they have to.
We are seeing another spectacular effort by Marino, who fires. Touchdown!
You know what the Jets were thinking? He's going to take the ball and throw it into the ground.
They stopped.
They all stopped. If you take a look at it, the offensive linemen, all they did was stand up. And Marino says to Ingram, I mean, that's the communication that they have. We saw fire on the two-point conversion. Tell Marino from the back of his hand, hey, throw the ball to me. Now here's Ingram for his 4th touchdown. This is a beautiful play.
So, analyst Paul McGuire nailed it. It was a trick play that Marino and Ingram had worked up. Marino had been watching the coverage all afternoon, and as they came to the line of scrimmage prior to the touchdown, Marino gave him the signal. Marino faked throwing it to the turf and then threw a back shoulder ball to Ingram, who caught his 4th touchdown of the game. That made it 28-24, and that's the way it would end. Marino finished the day with 359 yards passing to go along with his 4 touchdown throws. On this day in 1996, it was the greatest comeback in NBA history. This was a matchup between what would be the best team in the West at the end of the season, the Utah Jazz, against one of the worst teams in the division, the Denver Nuggets. However, it was the Nuggets that came out running and gunning in this one. Denver shot a blistering 86% in the first quarter, with Antonio McDyess, Bryant Stith, and Dale Ellis leading the way. They cooled a little bit in the second quarter, but not by much. At the end of the first 24 minutes, the Nuggets led 70-36. And I'll do the quick math for you. That is a 34-point hole that the Jazz had dug for themselves. But the lead had been as much as 36. And the thing is, this happens. Teams have an off night. Nothing's dropping. Every mistake gets amplified. The other team, they got a hot hand. Well, prior to this one, the Jazz had won 7 straight. They had Karl Malone and John Stockton, Jeff Hornacek, and Brian Russell. They had the firepower. They just needed to see if they could find some ammo. Malone got hot in the third, scoring 15 points in the 12 minutes, and the Jazz were able to claw back 21 of that 35-point deficit, but they obviously still had a lot more work to do. Malone kept pounding, Hornacek kept shooting, and even Chris Morris got in on the action, burying 2 unlikely threes, his first 2 of the year. But most of the damage was done inside. The Jazz outscored the Nuggets 31-6 in the paint in the final 24 minutes. When John Stockton buried a 3, the comeback was complete, and they had erased a 36-point deficit and took a 98-96 lead. The Nuggets still had some fight left in them, though. Bryant Stith hit a 3 to put them back up again, but Hornacek played some sweet string music from beyond the arc, and Brian Russell put the exclamation on the night with a dunk to give Utah the 107-103 win. The 34-point comeback is still the largest in NBA history. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Back in 1953, the folks at Swanson overestimated how many Thanksgiving turkeys that they would sell. By a lot, as in like 260 tons of turkey that they did not know what to do with. Well, Swanson sales rep Jerry Thomas traveled constantly in his role, and he ate a lot of meals on planes, and an idea struck him. What if we used these excess turkeys to create some kind of meal similar to what we have on airplanes, but for families who don't always have time to prepare a big meal? We'll call it the TV dinner and sell them for 98 cents a piece. And they were an immediate hit. Thomas received a raise and a bonus for coming up with the idea. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks for stopping by. Once again, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you have a great time today and enjoy all the football and the food and the family. Come on back tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.